April 16, 1945. A forest road 12 kilometers south of Magdeburg, Germany. The war is dying, but it hasn't stopped killing. American Third Army units push east through pine forests that smell of gunpowder and wet earth. The trees are too straight, too orderly, planted in rows like soldiers themselves. Spring has come to Germany, but you wouldn't know it from the faces of the men moving through these woods. Sergeant James Callahan walks point for his squad. 23 years old. A dairy farmer's son from Wisconsin. He's been in Europe for 11 months, which makes him an old man by infantry standards. The men who landed with him at Normandy are mostly dead or badly wounded. The replacements who fill their places look younger every week. The column stops. Ahead, on the forest road, a German motorcycle with sidecar sits abandoned, its engine still warm. The handlebars are bent. One wheel points at an impossible angle. Someone left in a hurry. Around the motorcycle, the signs are clear. Boot prints in the soft earth. Scattered equipment. A medical kit torn open, its contents strewn across the ground. Bandages, morphine syringes, scissors. Blood on the road, already turning brown. They find him 30 meters into the trees. A German soldier. Young, maybe 19. Wehrmacht uniform, standard field gray. He's propped against an oak tree, positioned carefully, as if someone tried to make him comfortable before leaving. His right leg is badly wounded, the trouser torn and dark with blood. His face is pale, waxy. He's breathing, but only barely. Callahan approaches slowly, rifle ready. The German's eyes open. He doesn't reach for his weapon. He doesn't move at all. He just watches Callahan with the blank expression of someone beyond fear. Medic, Callahan calls out. But Private Anderson is already coming forward, medical bag in hand. He kneels beside the German soldier, examines the wound with professional detachment. After 30 seconds, Anderson looks up at Callahan and shakes his head. The wound has been there too long. The blood loss too severe. The German soldier speaks. His English is surprisingly good. Water, he says. Just that one word. They give him water. What else can you do? The war is ending. Everyone knows it. The Russians are 40 miles away. Hitler is trapped in Berlin. German units are surrendering wholesale. This boy in front of them isn't an enemy anymore. He's just someone dying in a forest. The German soldier's name is Klaus Richter. They learn this because he tells them, his voice getting weaker. He's from Cologne. An engineering student before the war. He talks in fragments, his words coming slower. His unit was retreating. The motorcycle hit something, maybe a pothole, maybe a piece of shrapnel. He was thrown. His leg shattered. His comrades couldn't carry him. They positioned him against the tree and kept moving. Callahan sits down beside him. There's nothing else to do. They're not going to carry a dying German soldier. They're not going to leave someone alone to die, either. So they wait. Richter reaches into his jacket pocket. His hand shakes. He pulls out a letter. The envelope is worn, stained, folded and refolded so many times the creases have turned gray. He holds it out to Callahan. My mother, Richter says. Will you, when the war is finished? He doesn't complete the sentence. He doesn't need to. Callahan takes the letter. The address is written in careful script. Frau Elisabeth Richter. Hansering 47, Cologne. The envelope feels light, fragile. Inside is one page, maybe two. A letter from a son to his mother, never mailed. I'll try, Callahan says. He doesn't know why he says it. The promise feels impossible. They're in the middle of Germany, pushing toward Berlin. Cologne is to the west, behind the lines. The British occupy that sector now. Mail service to Germany doesn't exist. Even if it did, delivering a letter from a dead German soldier makes no sense. But Richter is looking at him with desperate hope, and Callahan can't take that away. I'll try, he says again. Richter dies 20 minutes later. He drifts away quietly, without pain, the morphine Anderson gave him doing its work. They bury him beside the oak tree. Not because they have to. Because it seems wrong to do anything else. Someone marks the spot with stones. Someone else says a few words. Then they move on. Callahan puts the letter in his breast pocket. The paper feels accusatory against his chest. They've all heard the stories. German soldiers carrying pictures of families they'll never see again. Letters from mothers and wives that will never be answered. The human debris of a dying empire scattered across Europe. But seeing it, holding it, that's different. That makes it personal. The squad moves east. The war continues. Days blur together. They take a town. They lose 2 men to artillery. They liberate a labor camp and see things that will never leave them. The letter stays in Callahan's pocket through all of it. On April 28, word comes through. Hitler is dead. Berlin is falling. The Wehrmacht is collapsing. Units are surrendering en masse. The officers say the European war will be over within days. The men celebrate with cautious relief. They've learned not to assume anything. But even the veterans feel it. The weight lifting. The possibility of surviving this thing. That night, Callahan takes out the letter. He hasn't opened it. That feels like a violation, somehow. But he looks at the address again. Cologne. The British will control that city soon. Maybe there's a way. He doesn't know that this letter will haunt him for the next 6 years. He doesn't know that keeping this promise will reshape his understanding of war, duty, and what it means to be human. He just knows that a dying boy asked him for something, and he said yes. Sometimes, that's all it takes. The war in Europe ends on May 8, 1945. VE Day. Victory in Europe. Callahan's unit celebrates in a small German town whose name he'll forget within a week. There's captured German schnapps, American cigarettes, and the dizzy relief of men who expected to die but didn't. They drink. They sing. They cry. Some laugh hysterically at jokes that aren't funny. The release is almost violent in its intensity. Callahan drinks too, but he can't fully join the celebration. The letter in his pocket is a reminder that endings are never clean. Somewhere in Cologne, a woman is waiting for news of her son. She doesn't know he's dead. She doesn't know he died asking a stranger to carry a message home. The days after VE Day bring a strange new phase of war. Not combat. Not peace. Something in between. The German military has collapsed, but Germany itself is in chaos. Millions of displaced persons. Destroyed cities. No functioning government. The Allied forces become occupiers, administrators, relief workers. Callahan's unit moves into Bavaria for occupation duty. They're stationed in a partially destroyed town, living in requisitioned buildings, trying to maintain order in a country that has stopped existing in any meaningful sense. Days are spent processing prisoners of war, organizing food distribution, preventing looting. One evening, Callahan shows the letter to his company chaplain, Captain Morrison. Morrison is a Methodist minister from Pennsylvania, a man who volunteered for chaplain duty after Pearl Harbor. He's seen everything the war can show, and he carries it with the exhausted compassion of someone who has run out of easy answers. Morrison reads the address, turns the envelope over in his hands. "You want to deliver this?" I told him I would. Cologne is British sector. You'd need authorization, travel papers, probably a dozen forms that don't exist yet. Morrison hands the letter back. "The bureaucracy will be impossible." "I know. But you're going to try anyway." "I told him I would," Callahan repeats. Morrison is quiet for a moment. Then he nods. "I'll see what I can do." No promises. The request goes through channels. Callahan expects rejection. Instead, surprisingly, it moves forward. Perhaps because the officers don't know what else to do with themselves now that the shooting has stopped. Perhaps because someone up the chain sees value in small gestures of humanity when humanity has been in such short supply. By mid-June, Callahan has authorization to travel to Cologne for 3 days. The travel orders describe the purpose as liaison with British occupying forces. Officially, he's delivering correspondence. Nobody asks what kind of correspondence. Nobody wants to know. He hitches rides west through Germany. The landscape he crosses should be beautiful in summer. The Rhine Valley. Ancient forests. Medieval towns. But the war has passed through here, and everything carries scars. Bridges blown. Buildings gutted. Refugees everywhere, walking in endless streams, carrying everything they own. Cologne appears on the horizon like a fever dream. The city was home to 750,000 people before the war. The British and American air forces dropped over 34,000 tons of bombs on it. Thousands of bombers. Hundreds of raids. The medieval city that stood for 1,000 years is gone. The destruction is absolute. Block after block of rubble. Entire neighborhoods reduced to foundation walls and broken bricks. The famous cathedral still stands, its twin spires rising above the devastation, but almost everything around it has been obliterated. Callahan enters the city through British checkpoints. The soldiers manning them are professional, weary. They've seen enough German cities to stop being shocked. They wave him through with minimal questions. Finding Hansering 47 takes most of a day. The street signs are gone. The addresses are mostly rubble. He asks directions from British military police, from German civilians picking through ruins, from anyone who might know. Finally, an elderly man points him toward what used to be the Hansering district. The building doesn't exist anymore. Where number 47 should be, there's only debris. The entire block is gone. Destroyed so completely that determining individual addresses is impossible. Callahan stands in the rubble and feels a sick disappointment. He came 400 miles to deliver a letter to an address that no longer exists. The irony is almost too perfect. The war destroyed the son. Then it destroyed his home. Nothing remains. A woman's voice behind him. Can I help you? He turns. She's perhaps 50, wearing clothing that has been repaired so many times it's hard to determine its original form. Her face is lined, weathered. She carries a bucket filled with bricks. Like everyone else in Cologne, she's clearing rubble, one bucket at a time, trying to salvage something from the ruins. Callahan shows her the envelope. I'm looking for Elisabeth Richter. She lived at number 47. The woman studies him carefully. American uniform. Foreign face. A letter with a German address. She's calculating risks, probabilities. Then she nods. I knew Frau Richter. Before the bombing. She moved to Ehrenfeld after her building was destroyed. I can show you. They walk through devastated streets. The woman talks as they go. The British provide food. Not much, but enough to survive. Housing is impossible. Most people live in cellars or makeshift shelters. Disease is spreading. Clean water is scarce. She speaks matter-of-factly, without complaint. This is simply the world now. Ehrenfeld is marginally less destroyed. Some buildings still have walls, roofs. The woman leads Callahan to a 3-story apartment block with blast damage but intact structure. 4th floor. She shares a room with 2 other widows. Callahan climbs stairs that creak under his weight. The hallway smells of mold and cooking cabbage. He knocks on the door marked with a handwritten Richter. The woman who opens the door is thin, gray-haired, wearing a dress too large for her frame. Her eyes are watchful, guarded. Callahan sees Klaus in her face. The same nose. The same careful expression. Frau Richter. Yes. The word is cautious. Americans at her door can mean anything. Trouble. Questions. Requisition orders. My name is James Callahan. He stops. How do you explain this? I met your son. In April. Before the war ended. Her expression doesn't change, but something in her posture shifts. She knows. She already knows what he's come to say. May I come in? She steps aside. The room is small, maybe 12 feet square. 2 narrow beds. A small table. 3 chairs. Another woman sits by the window, knitting. She looks up, then looks away, understanding this is private. Callahan sits at the table. Elisabeth Richter sits across from him. Between them, Callahan places the letter. She picks it up with hands that shake slightly. She doesn't open it. Not yet. She looks at Callahan. Tell me, she says. So he tells her. The forest road. The motorcycle. Klaus propped against the oak tree. He makes it as gentle as he can, but there's no gentle way to say someone's son is dead. He tells her Klaus wasn't alone. That they gave him water and morphine. That they buried him properly. That the end was peaceful. Elisabeth Richter listens without interrupting. When Callahan finishes, she's silent for a long moment. Then she opens the letter. Callahan looks away, giving her privacy. He hears her breath catch. Once. Then control returning. When he glances back, tears run down her face, but she's still reading. He wrote this before Christmas, she says finally. He was stationed near Aachen. He told me not to worry. That he would come home when the war ended. She looks up at Callahan. He believed that. He really believed he would survive. They all did, Callahan says. It's true. Even the ones who died expecting it believed, somewhere deep down, that they would be the exception. Elisabeth folds the letter carefully, returns it to its envelope. Thank you, she says. For bringing him home. In the only way you could. Callahan realizes he's crying. He doesn't remember when that started. He wipes his face, embarrassed. I'm sorry, he says. I'm sorry for all of it. You didn't start the war, Elisabeth says. Neither did Klaus. Neither did any of the boys who died. The men who started it are mostly dead or captured now. But the boys. She stops. Steadies herself. Thank you for treating my son like a human being. That's more than many would have done. They sit in that small room for an hour. Elisabeth tells Callahan about Klaus. His childhood. His love of mathematics. His dreams of becoming an engineer. She shows him a photograph, creased and worn. A young man in a student's uniform, smiling at the camera. Callahan tells her about Wisconsin. About dairy farming. About why he volunteered. They talk around the war, circling it, not quite touching it directly. Two people from countries that try to destroy each other, finding common ground in shared loss. When Callahan leaves, Elisabeth walks him to the door. She touches his arm. Klaus was not a Nazi, she says. He was just a boy who was conscripted. Who did what he was told. Who wanted to come home. Remember that, please. I will, Callahan says. And he means it. Walking back through the ruins of Cologne, Callahan feels something shift inside him. He's been carrying rage since Normandy. Rage at the Germans for starting this. Rage at the waste. Rage at the friends lost, the years stolen, the innocents destroyed. That rage has kept him going through months of combat. Now, somehow, it's lessening. Not gone. That would be too simple. But diminished. Complicated by the recognition that the enemy was also just people. Also mothers and sons. Also victims of the same insanity. The letter was written by a boy who wanted to come home. It could have been written by Callahan himself. By any of the men in his unit. The words would be different, but the meaning would be the same. I'm scared. I miss you. I hope to survive this. Klaus Richter died beside a road in Germany. James Callahan lived. That's the only difference between them. Luck. Geography. Which side of a line drawn by politicians and generals they happen to be born on. The transformation doesn't happen all at once. It's not that simple. But delivering that letter begins something. A recognition that the war was fought by people, not monsters. That everyone involved was trapped in something larger than themselves. That blame, while necessary, is also insufficient for understanding what happened. Callahan returns to his unit with the letter delivered and the promise kept. He doesn't talk about it much. How do you explain to your squad that you spent 3 days delivering mail to the mother of a dead German soldier? They wouldn't understand. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the letter changed him. Made him see the war differently. Made him understand that closing the distance between enemies sometimes requires nothing more than honoring a dying man's request. Small gestures. Human recognition. The acknowledgement that we're all, ultimately, just people trying to get through something terrible. Sometimes, that's everything. The months after delivering the letter are strange ones for Callahan. His unit remains in Bavaria through summer 1945, part of the massive occupation force trying to impose order on defeated Germany. The work is tedious, often pointless. They process endless paperwork for displaced persons. They guard supply depots. They patrol towns where the population watches them with expressions that mix resentment, exhaustion, and something close to relief. In July, they move to Frankfurt. The city is another ruin, another monument to bombing campaigns that reduce German urban centers to rubble fields. Callahan's days blend together. He writes letters home that say nothing important because nothing important is happening. He waits for orders to ship back to America. Everyone is waiting. But the letter has lodged in his mind. He finds himself thinking about Klaus Richter at odd moments. During guard duty. During meals. Late at night when sleep won't come. The German soldier's face as he died. Elisabeth Richter's expression as she opened the letter. The recognition that passed between them. Callahan starts noticing details he ignored before. The German civilians they interact with aren't monsters. They're shopkeepers, teachers, factory workers. People who got caught in historical currents they couldn't control. Many claim they never supported Hitler. Many are lying. But some aren't. And telling the difference is impossible. One evening in August, Callahan has a conversation that reshapes everything again. He's drinking beer with 3 other NCOs in a requisitioned Frankfurt apartment. The radio announces Japan's surrender. The war is over. Completely, finally, over. They celebrate, but the mood is strange. Relief mixed with uncertainty. What do you do after surviving something you expected would kill you? How do you go back to normal life after years of this? Sergeant Tom DeMarco, a combat veteran from Brooklyn, brings up something that's been bothering him. You ever think about what we did? Not just us. All of it. The bombing. The destruction. Cologne, Hamburg, Dresden. We destroyed entire cities. Killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. Was that necessary? The room goes quiet. These aren't conversations soldiers usually have. You don't question the war while you're fighting it. But now it's over, and the questions emerge. They started it, someone offers weakly. Sure, DeMarco says. They started it. But we finished it by doing basically the same thing they did. Strategic bombing. Total war. Civilians as legitimate targets. When did we become them? Callahan thinks about Elisabeth Richter. About Klaus. About the letter. Maybe we didn't become them, he says slowly. Maybe we were always capable of it. All of us. Any country. Any people. Put enough pressure on, make people scared enough, and they'll do anything. That's what this war proved. The conversation continues late into the night. They don't resolve anything. How can you resolve something that large? But they acknowledge it. The moral complexity. The uncomfortable truth that war damages everyone involved, winners and losers alike. Callahan ships back to America in November 1945. The journey home is surreal. The troopship is crowded with men desperate to get back to civilian life. They trade stories. They make plans. They talk about the future with forced optimism. But Callahan can't stop thinking about the letter. About Klaus Richter. About what it means to deliver a dead enemy's final words to his mother. He arrives in New York Harbor in December. The skyline looks impossibly clean, impossibly whole. No bomb damage. No ruins. America fought this war overseas. The homeland never burned. That distance, Callahan realizes, will make it harder to understand what happened. He goes back to Wisconsin. Back to the dairy farm. His parents are overjoyed to see him. His younger brother, too young for the war, asks excited questions about combat. Callahan gives vague answers. How do you explain war to someone who hasn't experienced it? How do you convey the boredom, the terror, the moral exhaustion? The farm needs work. They need his help. So Callahan falls into familiar rhythms. Early mornings. Milking cows. Mending fences. Physical labor that requires no complex thought. It's comforting in its simplicity. But at night, the dreams come. Not just the combat. That's there too. But increasingly, he dreams about the letter. About Klaus Richter dying in the forest. About Elisabeth Richter in her small room in Cologne. About promises kept and whether they matter. 6 months after returning home, Callahan does something unexpected. He writes a letter to Elisabeth Richter. He's not sure why. She doesn't need his correspondence. Their connection is tenuous at best. A moment of shared grief. But he writes anyway. He tells her he's home. That he thinks about Klaus sometimes. That delivering the letter meant something to him he's still trying to understand. He doesn't expect a response. The German postal system is still chaotic. Mail to and from Germany is uncertain at best. But 3 months later, a letter arrives. Elisabeth has written back. Her letter is simple. She thanks him again. She tells him about life in Cologne. The slow reconstruction. The continued hardship. She mentions that she thinks about Klaus's death often, but that knowing it was peaceful helps. That knowing someone cared enough to honor his final wish helps. Then she writes something that strikes Callahan deeply. The war tried to make us into monsters. All of us. It wanted us to hate purely, to kill without thought, to see enemies instead of people. That you could cross that line and deliver my son's letter shows that it didn't completely succeed. Small humanity in large inhumanity. Perhaps that's what victory really means. Callahan reads the letter multiple times. He puts it in a drawer with Klaus Richter's original envelope. 2 letters. 2 connections across the divide. They continue writing. Not frequently. Maybe 4 or 5 times a year. Brief updates. Elisabeth tells him about reconstruction efforts. About German attempts to reckon with what happened. About trials. About denazification. About the complicated process of rebuilding a country that destroyed itself and half of Europe. Callahan tells her about farming. About American prosperity. About the GI Bill allowing veterans to go to college. About the boom economy. About how distant the war feels already. But he also tells her about his struggles. The nightmares. The difficulty connecting with people who weren't there. The sense that something fundamental changed in him that can never be unchanged. Elisabeth understands. She's living in a country that must collectively process incomprehensible trauma. In 1948, Callahan uses the GI Bill to enroll at the University of Wisconsin. He studies history. Not military history. Social history. He wants to understand how ordinary people get swept into extraordinary catastrophes. How societies slide into barbarism. How humans reconcile themselves to horror. His thesis advisor, Professor Hartmann, is a German Jewish refugee who escaped Berlin in 1938. When Callahan mentions his correspondence with Elisabeth Richter, Hartmann is fascinated. "You're maintaining connection with a former enemy," he says. "That's rare. Most people want to forget." "I can't forget," Callahan says. "I tried." "Good," Hartmann replies. "Forgetting is how we repeat mistakes. Remembering is how we prevent them." Through his studies, Callahan begins to understand something crucial. The letter he delivered wasn't just about Klaus Richter. It was about refusing to dehumanize the enemy. It was about maintaining moral clarity in circumstances designed to destroy it. It was about recognizing that wars are fought between people, not between abstractions. This understanding shapes the rest of his life. He becomes a high school history teacher. He teaches about World War II not as a story of good versus evil, though elements of that exist, but as a story of how civilized nations descended into barbarism and what that descent cost everyone involved. He never glorifies his service. He tells his students about the letter. About Klaus Richter. About Elisabeth. About how easy it is to hate and how difficult it is to maintain humanity. His students don't always understand. Some think he's being soft on the Nazis. But others get it. They see what he's trying to teach. That war damages everyone. That moral clarity requires recognizing the humanity of your enemies even as you fight them. That small gestures matter. Years pass. The correspondence with Elisabeth continues. The letters become less frequent as both of them age, but they never stop completely. They write about grandchildren. About health. About memory. About how the war recedes into history even for those who lived it. In 1967, Callahan learns that Elisabeth has died. A distant relative in Germany sends a brief note. She passed peacefully. She was buried next to her husband, who died before the war. There was a small funeral. The note mentions that she kept Callahan's letters in a box beside her bed. That she spoke of him occasionally. The American who brought Klaus home. Callahan sits with this news for several days. He feels a grief disproportionate to the relationship. They met once. They exchanged letters for 20 years. That shouldn't create such a strong bond. But it did. He realizes that Elisabeth represented something important to him. Proof that maintaining humanity during war was possible. That small connections across the divide mattered. That promises kept, even impossible ones, have value. The letter Klaus Richter pressed into his hand in April 1945 shaped the next 22 years of Callahan's life. It taught him that the enemy was human. That war's greatest crime is not just the killing but the dehumanization that makes killing possible. That resisting that dehumanization, even in small ways, is crucial. The consequence of delivering that letter wasn't just personal transformation. It was a commitment to teaching others that war is not an adventure. That it destroys everyone it touches. That the only way to honor those who died is to remember them completely, their humanity, their fear, their ordinary dreams of survival. Klaus Richter wanted his mother to know he loved her. That simple wish, expressed in a forest as he died, created a chain of connection that lasted decades. It changed how an American soldier saw the war. How he saw the enemy. How he saw himself. Small gestures. Human recognition. The refusal to let war erase our common humanity. Sometimes, that's all we have. Sometimes, it's enough. The story should end there. The soldier delivered the letter. The mother received it. Both died knowing the promise was kept. A small moment of humanity in a war that tried to destroy all humanity. But stories don't end cleanly. They echo. James Callahan taught history for 33 years. He never published books. He never gave famous lectures. But in a small Wisconsin high school, he taught thousands of students about World War II. And he always told them about the letter. His students remembered. Some of them became teachers themselves. They passed the story along. Others just remembered it as that time in 11th grade when Mr. Callahan got emotional talking about a German soldier dying in a forest. In 1985, one of Callahan's former students, now a journalist named Rachel Morrison, wrote a small article about him for the local newspaper. The teacher who delivered a letter across enemy lines. It was meant to be a human interest piece. A veteran teacher retiring. A nice story about the war. The article mentioned Klaus Richter by name. It mentioned Elisabeth. It mentioned Cologne. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at the newspaper. It was from Germany. From a man named Peter Richter. He was Klaus's nephew. Elisabeth's grandson, child of her daughter who survived the war. Peter had been searching for information about his uncle for years. Klaus was family legend. The young man who died at the end of the war. Whose body was never recovered. Whose fate was unknown. Peter's mother, Klaus's sister, died in 1978 never knowing exactly what happened to her brother. But now, from a small Wisconsin newspaper article, he had answers. Peter wrote to James Callahan. The letter was emotional, grateful. He explained his family history. His mother's grief. His grandmother Elisabeth's careful silence about most of the war years. The questions that haunted them. You gave my grandmother peace, Peter wrote. We didn't know that. She never told us about your letters. She kept them private, perhaps because the connection was too painful to share. But knowing now that someone cared enough to deliver my uncle's final message changes how we understand his death. Callahan was 72 years old when he received this letter. For decades had passed since he met Klaus Richter in a German forest. He thought the story was finished. But here it was, alive again, demanding attention. He wrote back. He told Peter everything he remembered. The details that never made it into the newspaper article. The exact location, as best he could recall. The oak tree. The brief conversation. Klaus's concern for his mother above all else. Peter wrote again. He was coming to America for a conference in Chicago. Could he visit Callahan in Wisconsin? They met in Callahan's small house outside Madison. Peter was 43, a professor of engineering at the University of Heidelberg. He carried an old photograph album and a worn leather folder. These were my grandmother's, Peter said, opening the folder. Inside were Callahan's letters. 2 decades of correspondence, carefully preserved. Elisabeth had kept them all. They spent 3 hours talking. Peter wanted to know everything. Not just about Klaus's death, but about Callahan's experience. What the war was like. What delivering the letter meant. Why he maintained correspondence with Elisabeth. You have to understand, Callahan said, choosing his words carefully. The war taught us to hate. We were encouraged to hate. It made fighting easier. But hatred is corrosive. It damages the person who carries it. Delivering your uncle's letter was the first time in months I saw the enemy as human. As someone's son. That recognition probably saved me from becoming something I didn't want to be. Peter nodded. My grandmother wrote about that in her diary. I found it after she died. She said you were proof that not all Americans were monsters. That even in war, some people maintained their humanity. She was wrong, Callahan said quietly. Americans could be monsters too. We firebombed cities. We killed civilians. We were capable of everything the Germans were. That's what I learned. Not that we were better. That we were the same. All of us. Capable of tremendous evil under the right circumstances. But you chose differently, Peter said. I kept a promise, Callahan corrected. That's not heroism. That's just basic decency. The fact that it seemed remarkable shows how far we'd fallen. Before leaving, Peter gave Callahan something. A small photograph. Klaus Richter in his Wehrmacht uniform, smiling slightly, looking uncomfortable in the formal pose. On the back, handwritten, Christmas 1944. Keep it, Peter said. You knew him. Not for long, but you knew him. You deserve to remember what he looked like before he was dying. After Peter left, Callahan sat with that photograph for a long time. He tried to reconcile the young man in the picture with the broken soldier propped against an oak tree. They were the same person. Separated by 4 months and a war that destroyed everything in between. The story spread. Not widely. But within certain circles. Veterans groups. Teaching conferences. Historical societies. Callahan was occasionally asked to speak about his experience. He always agreed, though he hated being the center of attention. He would tell the story simply. No embellishment. No dramatic flourishes. Just the facts. A dying German soldier. A letter. A promise kept. The long aftermath. War is not adventure, he would tell audiences. It's not glory. It's just people killing each other for reasons that often make no sense to the people doing the killing. If we remember that, if we see our enemies as human beings with mothers and children and dreams, maybe we'll be more reluctant to start the next one. Some people in the audiences were moved. Others dismissed him as too soft. Too willing to humanize the enemy. Too unwilling to celebrate American victory. But the ones who got it really got it. They understood what he was saying. That maintaining humanity in war is the hardest and most important thing we can do. That small gestures matter. That promises kept have power beyond their immediate impact. James Callahan died in 1994, at age 72. He had lived nearly 50 years past the war. Raised children. Taught thousands of students. Built a quiet life of meaning and purpose. At his funeral, Peter Richter spoke. He had flown from Germany specifically to attend. He told the assembled mourners about his uncle Klaus. About the letter. About the connection between their families that spanned 2 countries and 5 decades. Mr. Callahan taught me something important, Peter said. He taught me that my uncle's death, while tragic, was not meaningless. Because it created a moment of human connection. Because it reminded us that even in war, we remain human. That's worth remembering. The story doesn't really have an ending. Not the way stories are supposed to end, with resolution and closure. Because its impact continues. Peter Richter tells his engineering students about it. Some of Callahan's former students tell their children. The small newspaper article gets occasionally cited in academic papers about post-war reconciliation. The letter itself is lost. Elisabeth never returned it to Callahan. Perhaps she kept it with her always. Perhaps it was lost in one of her moves. Perhaps she was buried with it. No one knows. But its impact remains. A small gesture of humanity in a war designed to destroy all humanity. A promise kept across enemy lines. A connection maintained across decades and differences. Klaus Richter died in a forest in April 1945. He was 19 years old. An engineering student who wanted to go home. His last wish was that his mother know he was thinking of her. James Callahan, a dairy farmer's son from Wisconsin, kept that promise. And in keeping it, learned something profound about war, humanity, and what it means to see your enemy as human. The war destroyed cities, killed millions, reshaped the world. But it couldn't destroy everything. Small acts of compassion survived. Small connections endured. Small promises mattered. That's what remains. Not the victories or defeats. Not the campaigns and strategies. But the moments when people chose to remain human despite everything pushing them toward hate. The letter was just paper. A few handwritten words from a dying son to his mother. But what it represented was larger. The insistence that even in war, we can choose humanity over hate. Connection over division. Compassion over cruelty. The battlefield where Klaus Richter died is now a quiet forest again. The trees have grown back. The road has been repaired. There's no marker indicating what happened there. No memorial stone. The world moved on. But somewhere in Germany, Peter Richter keeps his grandmother's letters. The correspondence between Elisabeth and James. A record of two people from enemy nations finding common ground in shared loss and mutual recognition of humanity. And somewhere in Wisconsin, one of James Callahan's former students became a teacher. She tells her students about World War II. And she tells them about the letter. Remember, she says, war is fought between people. Not between nations or ideologies or abstractions. People. With families who love them. With hopes and dreams. If we forget that, if we allow ourselves to dehumanize the enemy, we become capable of anything. Mr. Callahan understood that. He kept a promise to a dying German soldier because that's what humans do. We keep our promises. Even to our enemies. Especially to our enemies. The students listen. Some understand. Some don't. But the story continues. Passed down. Remembered. A small light in the historical darkness. Klaus Richter never made it home. But his letter did. Carried by an enemy soldier who became, in that carrying, something more than an enemy. Who became a witness to shared humanity. That's what endures. That's what we carry forward from the wreckage of war. Not the victories. Not the glory. But the recognition that we're all, at the end, just people trying to get through something terrible. And sometimes, a promise kept across enemy lines is enough. Sometimes, a letter carried home is everything.